I thought I was strong enough to walk away. My hand was already on the door, my heart racing, when his voice stopped me. Just one whisper, one sentence from his lips, changed everything I believed about us. It wasn't money, it wasn't power, it was unforgettable truth. Before I tell you how a billionaire's words burned into my soul forever, I want you to stay with me through this story. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever doubted your worth, this story will remind you of your power. Don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this are meant to heal and inspire. I used to think my life was too ordinary to ever be worth telling. Most mornings, I'd wake before the sun, sip on a cup of instant coffee, and brace myself for the day ahead. My apartment was small, the kind where you could hear your neighbor's television through the walls and smell someone else's cooking before you even turned on your own stove. I didn't complain, though. That little place was mine, paid for with long shifts and endless overtime, and I carried my independence like armor. Money was always tight. I knew the exact date rent was due down to the minute, because being even a day late meant notices on my door and anxious looks from my landlord. My phone buzzed with reminders about bills, and I sometimes chose groceries over new shoes or bus fare over dinner out. But even with all of that, I held my head high. I told myself I was strong, that no matter how many nights I went to bed counting coins, I wasn't going to let the world break me. What people didn't always see, though, was the weight I carried inside. I had been through relationships that left me hollow. Men who smiled sweetly at first, but slowly chipped away at me until I questioned my own worth. I'd been told I was too much, and in the same breath, not enough. Too ambitious, too independent, too black, too proud. Those words clung to me long after those men were gone, making me second guess every compliment, every promise. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes in the quiet dismissal of someone who never really saw you. I worked hard. I laughed with my friends. I made the best of what I had. But deep down, there was a loneliness I couldn't shake. I had dreams that stretched further than the city skyline, but I also carried scars that made me question whether love could ever feel safe. It wasn't that I didn't believe in love. It was that love had never chosen me in the way I deserved. Still, I refused to let bitterness define me. I dressed neatly, even when I had only 2 pairs of shoes worth wearing. I smiled, even when my chest felt heavy. I walked with my back straight because I didn't want anyone thinking I was broken, even if, some days, I felt like I was. My pride wasn't about arrogance, it was about survival. It was about reminding myself that no matter how many people underestimated me, I knew who I was. And yet, there were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, wondering if life had anything more to offer me than this constant fight. I couldn't have known then that my story was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined, that a single encounter with a man whose world looked nothing like mine would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about myself. Because before him, I had learned how to survive, but after him, I would learn what it meant to live. The day I met him wasn't special at all, at least not at first. I remember I had just finished one of those long days where everything seemed to stack against me. My hair refused to stay the way I wanted. The bus was late, and I had been snapping at myself for forgetting to eat lunch. I ducked into a quiet cafe, more to escape my thoughts than anything else. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh bread, the kind of warmth that reminded me of home. I was digging through my worn-out bag for loose change, embarrassed at how long it was taking, when I heard a calm voice behind me. "Let me." I looked up and saw him for the first time. At that moment, he didn't look like a billionaire. No polished suit, no expensive watch flashing under the lights. He wore a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled casually, and jeans that had seen better days. His hair was a little messy, like he'd run his hand through it a few too many times. What struck me most were his eyes, steady, curious, almost like he could see the things I tried to hide. I shook my head, clutching my coins tighter. "I've got it," I told him quickly. Pride wouldn't let me take help, not from a stranger, and definitely not from a man. He didn't push, he just smiled, the kind of smile that softened the edges of the room, and said, "Fair enough." Then he ordered his coffee and stepped aside. But somehow, fate wasn't done with us. When I turned to leave, my clumsy self bumped straight into him. My cup nearly spilled, and I muttered an apology, cheeks burning. He just chuckled lightly and asked if I wanted to sit for a moment. Normally, I would have said no. I wasn't the type to linger with strangers, but something about his presence disarmed me. He didn't feel like danger. He felt like stillness, like a pause in the chaos. Against my better judgment, I sat. We talked, and to my surprise, he asked questions that went beyond the usual. Not, "Where do you work?" or "What do you do?" but questions like, "What makes you happiest?" and "What keeps you awake at night?" No one had asked me things like that in a long time, and certainly not a man. I found myself answering honestly, even though I barely knew him. He listened in a way that made me feel seen. Not just looked at, but truly seen. It was unsettling because I wasn't used to it. Most men I had met looked past me, through me, or only at the surface. He seemed to notice the little things, the way I tapped my nails against the cup when I was nervous, the pause I took before admitting something vulnerable. When I asked about him, he was vague. He mentioned traveling often, hinted at business, but never bragged. If anything, he seemed almost amused when I pressed for details, like he was used to hiding in plain sight. Nothing about him screamed wealth, and if someone had whispered then that I was sitting across from a billionaire, I would have laughed. He felt too grounded, too human. Still, as much as I enjoyed the conversation, a part of me stayed guarded. I reminded myself that men like him, confident, charming, effortlessly comfortable, rarely stayed for women like me. I had been charmed before, only to end up broken. So when he asked if I came to that cafe often, I hesitated. I almost lied, almost told him this was my first and last visit, but something in me wanted to leave the door cracked open. By the time I stood to leave, my coffee cold, I realized I had smiled more in that 1 hour than I had in weeks. And yet, I told myself it meant nothing. Just a chance encounter, a moment in passing. What I couldn't have known was that he wasn't done with me. That simple meeting, coins in my palm, his voice steady behind me, was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. I thought that coffee shop moment would be the last I'd ever see of him. People come and go all the time in a city like mine, and I wasn't about to daydream over a stranger who'd only shared a smile and a few kind words. But life has a way of placing people in your path again when you least expect it. A week later, there he was, this time standing at the entrance of the library where I worked part-time. His head tilted like he was surprised to see me. He didn't walk over right away. He waited until I noticed him, until our eyes locked. And then, with that same calm energy, he said, "Seems we're meant to keep running into each other." Something in my chest fluttered before I could stop it. I wanted to brush it off, keep things professional, but the truth was, I felt drawn to him. It wasn't long before he invited me to dinner. Not a flashy place at first, just a cozy little restaurant tucked away in the corner of downtown, the kind with dim lights and soft jazz humming in the background. I kept waiting for the moment he'd reveal some hidden agenda, but instead he listened. He laughed at my sarcastic comments, and he made me feel like I belonged at that table. Still, I kept my guard up. Men had sweetened their words before, and I wasn't eager to be fooled again. Then came the night he opened the door to his other world. He asked me to join him at an event, a charity gala. I almost said no. I didn't have the right dress, the right shoes, the right anything. But he insisted, not with pressure, but with assurance. Just come as yourself. That's enough. I don't know why I believed him, but I said yes. Walking into that ballroom was like stepping into another universe. Chandeliers glittered overhead, waiters floated by with glasses of champagne, and the women sparkled in gowns that probably cost more than my annual rent. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards before anyone noticed I didn't belong. And people did notice. Their eyes followed me, lingering just a second too long, whispering behind manicured hands. But then he reached for my hand, lacing his fingers with mine, as if to say, I see you, you're with me. In that instant, I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't out of place. I was exactly where he wanted me to be, by his side. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease. The luxury was overwhelming, the gap between his life and mine too wide to ignore. I caught snippets of conversations around us, mentions of private jets, art collections, summer estates. My heart sank with the realization he wasn't just comfortable, he was wealthy in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, but deep down it scared me. Men with power had always come with conditions, and I wasn't sure I could survive another heartbreak. Yet he never flaunted it. If anything, he downplayed it, making jokes about how bad he was at dancing or how little he cared for these events. He focused on me, asking if I was comfortable, making sure I had what I needed. He treated me like a person, not a possession. And that, more than the sparkling lights or the polished silverware, left an impression on me. By the end of the night, as we slipped away from the crowd, he looked at me with quiet intensity. You're different, he said softly. Not because of where you come from, but because of who you are. His words unsettled me because I wanted to believe them, but part of me was terrified to trust. I had built walls so carefully around my heart, brick by brick, and yet here he was, somehow finding the cracks. I couldn't deny it anymore. I was being pulled into the deeper I stepped into his world, the more I tried to convince myself that it was safe to be there. He made space for me in rooms where I never imagined I'd belong. He looked at me like I mattered, and for a while, that was enough to quiet the little voice inside that kept warning me this couldn't last. But love, or even the possibility of it, has a way of stirring up every fear you've buried. It started with whispers. Not his whispers, the ones from people who orbited him. At a dinner one night, a woman with red lips and diamonds at her ears leaned close enough for me to hear her laugh. She won't last, she said to another guest, as though I were invisible. He always gets bored. I tried to ignore it, tried to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat. But her words clung to me long after we left that table. Then came the rumors. A friend of a friend mentioned seeing him out with someone else, a striking woman whose name carried weight in magazines. I brushed it off at first. People love to gossip about rich men. But the seed of doubt was planted. Every time he glanced at his phone, every time he excused himself to take a call, my chest tightened. I didn't want to be the fool again, the woman left piecing herself back together while the man moved on untouched. I told myself to be rational. I told myself I had no reason to distrust him. But the scars from my past whispered otherwise. Men had lied to me before, and each lie had left me more fragile than I cared to admit. One night, the weight of it all became too heavy. I asked him directly, my voice trembling in a way that betrayed my resolve. Is there someone else? For a moment, he just looked at me, silent, unreadable. And that silence, it shattered something inside me. Because silence, to me, had always meant guilt. It had always been the space where truths were hidden. He didn't rush to deny it, didn't fight to prove me wrong, and that hesitation was enough for my fears to feel justified. I remember the hollow ache in my chest as I turned away. I told myself I wouldn't beg for clarity, wouldn't lower myself to chasing answers he wouldn't give. I had promised myself long ago that I would never let a man make me feel small again, and in that moment, walking away felt like the only power I had left. Back in my little apartment, surrounded by peeling paint and the hum of my old fridge, I felt the weight of everything. How foolish I had been to think I could exist in his world without losing myself. How naive to believe his attention meant something different this time. I had let myself hope, and hope can be the cruelest betrayal of all. The next time I saw him was in his private room, the kind of place where the curtains were heavy and the air felt too still. I hadn't planned to go, but my heart and my pride were at war. I needed answers, closure, something to ease the storm inside me. I told myself this would be the last time. I would walk in, face him, and walk out stronger. But as I stood there, my voice shaking with everything I had bottled up, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. And when I finally turned to leave, my hand on the door, my body trembling with the weight of goodbye, I never expected that what came next would stop me in my tracks. Because just when I thought I had lost everything, he whispered words I knew I could never forget. I can still hear the sound of the door handle beneath my hand, cool and heavy, like it was waiting for me to choose between leaving or staying. My heart was racing, my pride screaming for me to walk out of that room and never look back. I had been here before, on the edge of goodbye, carrying all the pieces of myself that men had broken. But just as I began to turn the handle, I heard his voice, low, steady, almost trembling. Don't let them make you believe you're not enough. For a moment, I froze. The words slipped through the air like they had been waiting in him all along, waiting for the exact second I would try to leave. And they pierced me because those were the exact words I had buried deep inside. The words that had haunted me for years, from every man who had ever dismissed me, every room where I felt out of place, every glance that told me I didn't belong. I turned slowly, half expecting to see a smirk, some kind of performance. But his eyes weren't playing games. They were raw, stripped of the usual calm control he carried everywhere else. He looked at me like he could see the wounds I thought I'd hidden, the ones I'd covered with pride and independence. I wanted to be strong, to tell him his words didn't matter. But the truth is, they did. They mattered more than I wanted to admit. Because when you've carried the weight of being overlooked, underestimated, told you're too much or not enough, hearing someone speak against that weight feels like a hand pulling you out of deep water. I let go of the handle and stood there, torn between wanting to run and wanting to collapse. You don't understand, I whispered, my voice breaking. You don't know what it's like to live in a world that decides who you are before you even open your mouth. He stepped closer, not with the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the room, but with the quiet urgency of someone who wanted to meet me where I was. Then let me learn, he said. Don't shut me out before I get the chance to know all of you. No one had ever asked to know all of me. They had wanted the surface, the parts that were easy to love, the smile, the strength, the way I could hold everything together. But the scars, the insecurities, the pieces I carried in silence, those were always too heavy for anyone else to hold. Yet here he was, asking not to look away. I felt tears sting my eyes, and for once, I didn't rush to hide them. My whole life, I had believed vulnerability was weakness, that letting someone see me break was giving them permission to shatter me further. But his whisper, It wasn't just words, it was a promise. Not that he'd be perfect, not that the world would stop judging me, but that he wouldn't add to the weight I already carried. Something shifted in me that night. The walls I had built didn't crumble all at once, but they cracked enough for the light to slip in, enough for me to breathe differently, to believe, even if just for that moment, that love could look like healing instead of hurt. I didn't say yes to him that night. I didn't fall into his arms or forget the doubts that had led me there. But I also didn't leave. I stayed. I listened. And in staying, I allowed myself to imagine a future where maybe, just maybe, being enough wasn't something I had to prove, and all it took was a whisper. After that night, I carried his whisper with me everywhere. It lived in the quiet spaces between my doubts, like a voice reminding me to breathe when the world told me to shrink. Don't let them make you believe you're not enough. The words echoed not just in my ears, but in my bones, carving themselves into places I thought would never heal. But the truth is, he didn't magically fix me. Billionaire or not, he was still just a man, with flaws and silences I didn't always understand. What changed wasn't him, it was me. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring my worth against the eyes watching me, whispering about me, doubting me. I started measuring myself by the battles I had survived, the strength it took to still stand, the love I had always poured into others even when I got nothing back. His world didn't suddenly become mine. The ballrooms, the private planes, the exclusive dinners, they were still foreign, still filled with stares that reminded me I didn't come from money or privilege. But instead of letting those stares strip me down, I wore my difference like armor because I realized something powerful. I was never meant to blend into his world. I was meant to bring my own into it. And him? He became less of a mystery and more of a mirror. Not a perfect reflection, but a reminder that sometimes the people who come into our lives aren't here to rescue us. They're here to awaken something we already had, but forgot to claim. His whisper didn't give me worth. It simply reminded me I had always been worthy. Looking back, I can admit I almost let fear rob me of that lesson. My pride had wanted me to walk out, to slam the door behind me and never look back. And maybe, in another version of my life, I would have. But standing there, hearing those words, I realized leaving wouldn't have been strength. It would have been surrender. Surrendering to the lies I had been fed all my life about what a black woman could or couldn't be. So I stayed. Not for him, not for his wealth, not even for the promise of love. I stayed for me, for the chance to step into a version of myself that wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for betrayal to define her again. Even now, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe he'll always be a part of my story, maybe only a chapter. But what matters is what he gave me in that one moment when I needed it most, the permission to believe in my enoughness. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you can never go back to the woman you were before. So if you're listening to me now, whoever you are, wherever you are, I want you to take this with you. Don't wait for someone else to whisper it. Don't wait for a billionaire, a lover, a friend, or anyone else to tell you what you've already known deep down. You are enough. You always have been. And if the world ever tries to convince you otherwise, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the words that save us aren't shouted from a stage or written in books. Sometimes they're whispered in a quiet room when you're standing on the edge of walking away, and they find you just in time. Because those whispers, they can change everything. Some words can cut you. Others can heal wounds you thought would never close. That night, his whisper reminded me who I really was, and no one could ever take that from me again. If my story touched you, share it, subscribe, and remember, your worth is never up for debate.